This is week 10, the last week of the winter trimester of 2018. So this was the last week working with Brian for my portrait painting. So this week mostly I worked on the chest, neck, shoulders, arms, and hand. And I'm looking a lot in my mirror, my normal mirror, my black mirror, red glasses, this lens that I have that kind of gives everything a sepia look. And I'm more so looking at structure, obviously, but a lot of it is also working with and trying to see how the light is falling over him and how it's falling over my painting, and if there's a way that I can get mine to look more naturalistic and just a better sense of light over it. So finishing up this week, I'm really happy with how this painting has ended up. I want to work one more day with just getting the message holder that Brian's holding, but other than that, the painting's pretty much finished. And I'm really happy with it. I feel this painting has been a breakthrough with me with a certain technique that I've been trying to do for a long time, which it's how I'm laying the paint down and getting a more painting directly, but also with painting directly is painting more simply, or having it look like it's painted simply. So it's how I'm laying down brush strokes, and so even if I have a lot of brush strokes, I can kind of pull them together and unify them in a way that maybe it was a lot of brush strokes to get it to look like it was just one. And then, so I was doing that technique with the thicker paint, more direct painting in his head. A lot of his forehead is that, and then different way of painting the beard, for example, and mouth area, which is more dry brushed and kind of like stippling on that area. The chest, there's elements in the chest area where I've more drawn with the paint and there's more line work with how I'm laying down the paint, and then in the bigger forms kind of dabbing the paint on, but then also putting brush strokes in as well. So I'm happy that there's a lot of variation in how I'm applying the paint, which I like because that just gives more interest, and I feel like then paintings that have a lot of variation of how the paint's put down, you can look at the painting for a while and it keeps giving something back because there's a lot of interest everywhere in it. And in my final critique, Matt and Magda pointed out that I could still be varying the brush strokes even more with the size of brush stroke, and more specifically trying to find areas where I can show a big plane with a really big simplified brush stroke and not have to break it down so much. So that's something that I'm definitely interested in trying to push more and to experiment more with future paintings. And my still life, I'm really happy with how this is going. Everything was pretty roughly blocked in with this, and now I'm getting things a lot more specific. So how everything has been blocked in and where I'm focusing on getting things more specific is I'm focusing on the focal point areas. So definitely the focal point of this painting is the jar that has the white pigment in it, which is actually rabbit skin glue pigment. Or the material of rabbit skin glue. So yeah, I started that first because it's the focal point. It's the pretty much in the center of the painting, and it's also the brightest thing in the painting as well. So I started there, and I worked on then from that the other bottles. I worked on the sheets of paper that are laid on the plank of wood, and then I worked on the plank of wood because the plank of wood does this nice thing with as the edge of the wood moves to the right side of the painting, it gets lighter, so it has this nice direction of light that I like a lot. So I'm also painting these in different ways as well, so trying to get that variation of how I'm applying the paint in it. So when I was working on the bottles, I started off really with dry brushing and kind of stippling around to get the drawing as accurate as I can, and using like that tiny bit of paint that I'm using to kind of fuss with the edges to get them exactly how I want them. It's using a little bit of paint and then There's other areas in the bottles then where it does have thicker paint where it needs to have it. So is definitely a way that I'm painting. And then for the sheets of paper, I'm painting those with comparatively a lot more paint, and instead of it being kind of dry brush patted on, it's more brush strokey, and that's a lot of a more broken color and impressionistic, it seems like, as I will go back to my viewing spot and see where there needs to be a darker streak, and I'll go up and put that down in a confident longer brush stroke and then step back and see how that affected it, and keep going back and forth that way. So just the look of the paper, how it's done, looks completely different than the bottles. And then moving on from that, the plank of wood, and the edge of the plank of wood that is getting most of the light as it's moving to the right side of the painting, that has the most paint down on it thickly. And then on the surface of the plank of wood where things are resting on, I'm trying really hard to keep this, you can still see the underpainting and the canvas texture, and then I'm putting longer thin brush strokes where there needs to be warms and cools, mostly cools, as it's laid over on that plank of wood. So that's getting an interesting look to it as well. So definitely, as I am starting to refine areas of the painting, I'm building up the paint thickly in some areas, but in also other areas, I'm trying to keep it as thin as possible because I like that variation of thickness in paint. And so the plank of wood, there's areas in it where you can see the underpainting. And the same thing with, you can see the underpainting for the stacks of paper. The paper that's most to the left, that is the underpainting with just this warm ochre color. I dry brushed over it at the start of it. So that's interesting with the sheets of paper, that it's got very thick paint in the areas where it's catching most of the light and has that really warm, bright value. And then the darkest sheet of paper, it's painted very thinly. And it's the same way with the plank of wood, where I've got that impasto thicker paint where it is catching a lot of light, and then as it's moving back and where it is darker and cooler, it is the imprimatura of the painting showing through a whole bunch. So I still have a whole lot to do left with this big still life painting, so I will get it finished up next trimester.